Dooby dooby doo. Be dooby 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 doo. Be dooby 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 dum dum doo. Oh, hi there. I'm Esquire, the world's greatest Canadian wizard. You can tell I'm Canadian because I know what movie that song came from. Anybody else? I didn't think so. That's because you're not Canadian. So today I want to talk about something very important. Why expat Chinese in Canada are trying to reach the sky with a new Tower of Babel called high rises. Well, if you know anything about the Chinese, and I certainly do, because look how white I am, I must know everything, you would know that the Chinese have a pervasive concept that runs through all their times and all their various civilizations and all their various regimes that's called the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven is conferred upon an enlightened ruler or government by the gods themselves. I'm not sure which ones they are because there are so many, they must be all fighting and sleeping with each other's wives and husbands and stuff. Or turn into monsters because you get bored. So at any rate, to get this mandate of heaven requires an enlightened ruler or a very good press. Because what the mandate of heaven is supposed to do is confer protection upon that blessed realm. Because of the ruler being a good, enlightened person, right? Like Catherine the Great. They have to be able to protect the kingdom from the natural disasters, right? From plague and from floods and from drought, bad harvest, famine, right? Foreign invasion, banditry from within. And if a government can juggle all those factors at once, which is technically impossible, especially in those days, because they didn't know it cost half that stuff, well, then they would lose the mandate of heaven. Or at least the opposing press would claim they had lost the mandate of heaven. And that led to all sorts of hilarity ensuing, most of which was armed peasants dying, because, that's kind of like what all of the history of government is peasants dying. Read history. I'm not making this stuff up, you people. World War II ring any bells? World War I? Yeah, who died? The rich? I don't think so. Oh, no, there's plenty of them around. 1% of them, at least. So anyway. So what happens is, you can lose that mandate of heaven if there's a flood, or a plague, or an invasion, or a famine. And, according to traditional Chinese belief, you deserve to lose that mandate of heaven if you can't protect your people from those basic threats. No, those are existential threats. Those aren't simple person-to-person threats. Those are existential threats that can bring down your whole nation if you don't attend to them immediately. And so, not talking about how we treat Puerto Rico, mind you, or Haiti, or the Philippines, because that would be the United States, not Canada. So anyway, to maintain or to obtain, I guess in the first place, the mandate of heaven, there are two ways. One is an enlightened ruler. He will have it conferred upon him by the gods who are all-knowing, all-seeing, or at least that's what their press says. And they will make sure that good things happen while he or she is in charge, right? Okay. The other way is to march on heaven and present your list of demands to the gods yourself. Now, we try to do that in Babylonia with what's called the Tower of Babel, right? Right? There's a story about that. That was sending somebody up to God. I think that was all about, if I remember correctly, because I was there. It was all about sending a messenger up to God to complain about the taste of spinach. And, well, you saw that happened. The spinach still tastes like spinach. So anyway, you march on heaven to get your needs done, right? I mean, it only makes sense. And so the Chinese today in Canada are there building these giant high-rise buildings upon which they will place platforms and build higher and platforms and build higher and eventually reach heaven and be able to demand of the gods by virtue of being the only ones there, right? The only people voting, that they obtain the mandate of heaven. and they'll rule Canada. I'm sure with a loving and caring hand, just like mainland China rules its people today. So, if you wish to gain the mandate of heaven, you have to be an enlightened ruler, or Chinese, and have a very tall building to climb up. And since there are more of those than there are enlightened rulers, maybe that's a better shot. But anyway, point being, to be an enlightened ruler, you have to be able to accord your people certain privileges. Did you think it was all one way? Yeah, you did, didn't you, you gangster? You have to be able to provide your people, the least of your people, with a minimum standard of living and education. Yeah, that's your job. How you doing, cat? You had one job. Okay. Well, that's the one. Uniform education, no pay to win colleges. That's such a flaw in the system as has to be rooted out at the federal level. Those people have to be put out of business, put to work in public schools, so that everyone has a chance at a good education, not just the rich. So, you need to be able to provide your polity. That's everybody. That's not just the 15%. Well, really it's only 1% because most of the rest is supposed to be the middle class. And like my beard, there's no middle class anymore. So anyway, the 85% that constitute most polities are poor. And those are the people that the government is there pledged to protect. Those are the people upon whose treatment the gods themselves will decide whether the government is worthy of the mandate of heaven. Irrespective of press. The press is so yellow, oh my gosh. There's no way to get any truth from any of the press. The Russians, the Soviet Union had a very good saying, which I like. They had two news organs, Izvestia and Pravda. They're both official news organs of the Soviet Union. So if you wanted the hard line, the official line, you would go to Izvestia or Pravda. Now Pravda means truth, and Izvestia means news. And the Russians used to say, there is no truth in news, and there is no news in truth. Nie pravda v izvestia, nie izvestia v pravda. Pretty insightful for people that we don't think are smart. Well, they seem to be pretty smart. They provide some of the great writers. You don't think that takes intelligence or even genius? You're wrong. So, anyway. You have to be able to present your people, provide your people, and assure your people a minimal standard of living and education that makes your nation a model among all the nations. And it doesn't matter how much of your own skimming off the top you have to give up for that. Because if you can't provide it, you're not doing your job and don't deserve that cream anyway. And that's the truth. And then there is a second aspect besides minimum standard of living and education. There is a minimum standard of security, both external and internal, that every government has to provide for its polity. Every one, the least to the greatest, from Bill Gates to me. And that is security. That's right. You have to be able to defend your nation against external invaders and against internal banditry. Now, those two things that I've given you, right, the security question and the standard of living question, are pretty elementary. And even people that don't want to agree are going to have to admit that those are real. Now, beyond that, there's one more thing that applies to both. Old Esquar's thinking. Must be the drugs. You have to be able to provide a strategic rail infrastructure, because without it, you cannot respond to the things that make you lose the mandate of heaven. Plague, famine, flood, drought, invasion, or banditry. So you need that infrastructure. You need that strategic infrastructure on rails. And civilian carriers can't block it? No way. Sorry. It should have no competition because it isn't there to make money. You're supposed to be pouring money into it because in case there's a drought or a plague, or in case there's an invasion, or in case there is a flood, you can push the right materials and the right people to the spot as quick as possible. Nobody in your way saying, wait till I make a profit here. Wait till I make a profit. Because that makes you lose the mandate of heaven if you let people like that decide for you. And you governmental types are probably going to laugh at my idea of the mandate of heaven because you don't listen to 1/2 of the world. That's what China is. Because you don't think anything ever came out of China is worth listening to. That's because you're stupid or badly educated, which means your pay to win schools are failed. So, even education, homogenous education for everybody, right? Minimum standard of living for everybody, which includes that in education. And minimal security for every person from without and from within. So, and this is how you test that. I should be able to hitchhike from one end of my nation to the other and never be harassed, never be profiled, never be thrown up against a car, never be beaten up and left in an alley for dead, never be stolen down from my spare parts, never be cut open and used as a drug mule. And if my government can't provide that basic modicum of security, it's no government at all. It's a bunch of gangsters. Yes or no? Yes or no? That isn't a gray area question. That's a yes or no. That's black and white. If your government can't provide basic security and basic standard of living and a strategic rail infrastructure for ameliorating all the problems that might rise in a quick and effective fashion, then it's no government at all. It's just an enabler for rapists and pillagers. And if you got one of those governments, you know what? Time to get the old jerks out and put a bunch of new jerks in. Now, because I'm a peacenik, I advertise we do that by peaceful means. First of all, we educate the polity. The polity have to be educated to a uniform standard so that we can all make informed choices. And we can decide who we want to rule us based on understanding of the topics instead of a fashion show. Oh my gosh, I have a bigger baseball game than you do, so I should be president. What? What? I have more pageantry than you have, so I'm more What does that have to do with helping your poor? Zero, less than zero, negative numbers. That's a failed government that honors pageantry instead of service. That's a failed government. Those are the governments we're trying to leave behind because they're all run by knuckle draggers, people that never left the Stone Age. Get smart. Get smart, Canada. Obtain and maintain the mandate of heaven. If you do a good enough job, the gods will also smile on you if you want to rule the whole world. No one's been able to do that yet because they didn't have the mandate of heaven. This is Eshkalar. No one says the stuff I say. Try finding this on some other news channel.
Thanks for listening to the Eshkalar Show today. Eshkalar will be back when the need is great and his heart is pure, and the hangover abates just a little bit.